Jake Miller pulled his worn coat tighter as he walked through the snow toward his barn. The wind cut through the fabric like a knife, making him shiver. His breath came out in white puffs that disappeared quickly in the freezing air. The storm had been bad, really bad. 3 days of heavy snow had buried most of his property under 2 feet of white powder. He looked at his small farmhouse behind him. The paint was peeling, and one of the windows had tape over a crack. The roof needed fixing before next winter, but Jake did not have the money for that. He barely had enough money for food. His beekeeping business was not doing well. People did not buy much honey anymore, and the big companies sold it cheaper than he could make it. The barn door creaked as he pushed it open. Inside, his bee boxes sat quiet and still. Winter meant the bees stayed inside their hives, eating the honey they had made during summer. Jake had left them enough food to last until spring, but he worried about them anyway. These bees were all he had left of his father's farm. Jake walked around the barn, checking for damage from the storm. The roof looked okay, but some snow had blown in through gaps in the walls. He would need to fix those soon. As he walked, he thought about the letters on his kitchen table. Bills, more bills than he could pay. The bank wanted money for the farm loan. The electric company wanted money too. Everyone wanted money Jake did not have. He pushed open the back door of the barn to check the outside area. The snow was deep here, almost up to his knees. Jake started to turn back inside when he saw something strange. There were small bumps in the snow near the old oak tree. 3 small bumps that did not look like rocks or fallen branches. Jake walked closer, his boots crunching in the snow. As he got near, he saw something that made him stop and stare. The bumps were not rocks, they were creatures. Small creatures, about the size of house cats, but unlike anything Jake ever seen. Their skin looked like scales, but these scales seemed to glow with a soft light, even though they were almost buried in snow. One creature had scales that looked red and orange, like a tiny fire burning under its skin. Another had scales that sparkled white and blue, like stars in the night sky. The third one had scales that glowed green and gold, like sunlight through leaves. Jake knelt down in the snow, not caring that it soaked through his pants. The creatures were barely moving. Their eyes were closed, and they breathed very slowly. They were dying from the cold. "What are you?" Jake whispered to himself. He had never seen animals like these before. They looked like tiny dragons from the storybooks his mother used to read to him. But dragons were not real. These had to be some kind of lizard, maybe from a zoo or a pet store. Someone must have lost them in the storm. Jake did not think about it anymore. These creatures needed help, and he was the only one who could help them. He took off his coat and carefully wrapped it around the 3 small beings. They were so cold their scales felt like ice, but they were still alive. He could feel their hearts beating very slowly. "It's okay," he said softly. "I'm going to help you." Jake carried them into the barn and set them down on an old blanket near his workbench. He turned on the small heater he used when working in winter. Then he ran to the house and got more blankets, a heating pad, and some sugar water he used to feed weak bees. Back in the barn, Jake made a warm nest for the creatures. He put the heating pad on low and covered it with soft blankets. Then he gently placed each creature in the warm nest. They were so small and light, like holding birds. The creatures did not wake up, but their breathing got a little stronger. Jake used a small spoon to put drops of sugar water on their lips. He had done this with sick bees before. Sometimes sugar water helped weak creatures get their strength back. "Come on," Jake said quietly. "Don't give up." He stayed in the barn for hours, watching the creatures and making sure they stayed warm. The heater made the air warmer, and the creatures' scales began to glow a little brighter. Jake thought this was a good sign. As evening came, Jake had to go inside for dinner. He did not have much food, just some bread and soup, but he was too worried about the creatures to be hungry. He kept thinking about them in the barn. Were they getting better? Were they still alive? After dinner, Jake went back to the barn with a flashlight. The creatures were still in their warm nest, but something had changed. Their scales were glowing brighter now, and they were breathing normally. One of them, the one with red and orange scales, opened its eyes and looked at Jake. The creature's eyes were beautiful, like small jewels that sparkled in the light. It made a soft sound, like a cat purring but more musical. Jake had never heard anything like it. "Hello there," Jake said softly. "Are you feeling better?" The creature looked at him for a long moment, then closed its eyes again. But Jake could tell it was not dying anymore. It was getting stronger. Jake stayed in the barn until midnight, watching over the three creatures. He gave them more sugar water and made sure they stayed warm. He did not know what they were or where they came from, but he knew one thing for sure. He was going to take care of them. Jake woke up early the next morning and rushed to the barn. The sun was just coming up, painting the snow orange and pink. He had dreamed about the three creatures all night, worried that he might find them dead when he returned. But when he opened the barn door, Jake smiled for the first time in weeks. All three creatures were awake and moving around their warm nest. They looked much better than the night before. Their scales were brighter, and their eyes were clear and alert. The red and orange one saw Jake first. It made that same musical, purring sound and tried to stand up. Its legs were still weak, but it managed to stay upright. The other two creatures turned to look at Jake too. The blue and white one tilted its head like a curious dog. The green and gold one made soft chirping sounds. "Good morning," Jake said quietly. He did not want to scare them. "Are you hungry?" Jake had brought some different foods to try. He had honey, sugar water, small pieces of fruit, and even some cat food from a neighbor. He did not know what these creatures ate, but he wanted to help them get stronger. He put small amounts of each food on a plate and set it near the creatures. They sniffed everything carefully. The red and orange one tried the honey first. It seemed to like the taste because it ate more. The blue and white one preferred the sugar water. The green and gold one ate small pieces of apple. As Jake watched them eat, he noticed something strange. The creatures seemed to talk to each other. They made different sounds, soft chirps and musical hums. Sometimes their scales would flash with light, like they were sending signals to each other. "You're pretty smart, aren't you?" Jake said. The creatures finished eating and began to explore their area. They moved carefully at first, but got braver as they got stronger. Jake had made sure there was nothing dangerous they could get into. He watched them play together, chasing each other around the blankets and making happy sounds. Then something amazing happened. The creatures noticed Jake's bee boxes. Instead of being scared of the buzzing sounds, they seemed very interested. They walked over to the boxes and sat down nearby. Jake worried the bees might sting them, but the bees did not seem upset at all. In fact, the bees seemed calmer than usual. Jake had been keeping bees for 10 years, and he had never seen them act like this. Usually his bees were more active, and sometimes aggressive during feeding time. But now they were flying in gentle patterns around their boxes, almost like they were dancing. Jake decided to name the creatures. The red and orange one was always first to try new things, so he called it Spark. The blue and white one was gentle and quiet, so he called it Crystal. The green and gold one was always moving and exploring, so he called it Sunny. Over the next few days, Jake developed a routine. He would check on the creatures first thing in the morning, give them food and fresh water, then do his other farm work. The creatures got stronger every day. They could walk and run normally now, and they were growing bigger too. But the most amazing thing was what happened to Jake's bees. They were more active than they had ever been in winter. Usually, Bees stayed inside their hives when it was cold, only coming out on the warmest days. But now they were flying around even when it was cool outside. Jake checked his bee boxes and could not believe what he found. The bees had made more honey in 1 week than they usually made in a month. The honey was also different. It was clearer and tasted sweeter than any honey Jake had ever seen. "This is impossible," Jake said to himself. But he could not argue with what he saw. The creatures seemed to have a special connection with the bees. When Spark, Crystal, and Sunny were near the bee boxes, the bees would fly around them in happy circles. Sometimes the creatures would hold out their small hands, and bees would land on them without stinging. It was like they were old friends. Jake started to wonder if the creatures were the reason for the change in his bees. Maybe they gave off some kind of energy that helped living things grow stronger. He had heard about animals that could do strange things, but he had never seen anything like this. One morning, Jake got a call from his neighbor, Mrs. Brown. She was very excited. "Jake, you have to come see this," she said. "My garden is doing something crazy." Jake walked over to Mrs. Brown's house, which was about half a mile from his farm. Her garden was next to the fence between their properties. Jake had always thought it was too close to his bee boxes, but now he was glad that Mrs. Brown's winter vegetables were growing like it was spring. Her cabbages were huge, her carrots were long and sweet, and even her flowers were blooming in the snow. She had never seen anything like it. "It started about a week ago," Mrs. Brown said. "Right after that big storm. My plants just started growing like crazy. What do you think is causing it?" Jake looked back toward his barn, where he knew Spark, Crystal, and Sunny were probably playing with his bees. He thought about the amazing honey his bees were making. He thought about how everything around his farm seemed more alive and healthy. "I don't know," Jake said, but he was starting to have an idea. That evening, Jake sat in his barn watching the three creatures. They were much bigger now, about the size of small dogs. Their scales were brighter, and they moved with more confidence. They still made their musical sounds to each other, and their scales still flashed with light. Jake was happy to see them getting better, but he was also worried. Soon people would start to notice the strange things happening around his farm. What would he do then? 2 weeks had passed since Jake found the creatures in the snow. Spark, Crystal, and Sunny were now the size of medium dogs and showed no signs of stopping their growth. Jake had to move them to a larger area in the back of his barn where they had more room to play and exercise. But it was not just their size that was changing. The creatures were doing things that made Jake realize they were not normal animals at all. Yesterday morning, Jake had watched Spark create small bolts of electricity between its claws. The red and orange creature seemed to be practicing making the sparks bigger and smaller on purpose. Crystal could make ice form in the air around it, even though the barn was warm. Sunny could create balls of light that floated around like tiny suns. Jake tried to tell himself there had to be a normal explanation. Maybe they were some kind of rare lizard with special abilities. But deep down, he knew the truth was much stranger than that. The changes around his farm were getting harder to hide too. His bees were now active all day, even in the cold. They had filled every box with golden honey that seemed to glow with its own light. Mrs. Brown's garden looked like paradise in the middle of winter. Even the old oak tree where Jake had found the creatures was growing new leaves, something that should not happen until spring. Then Jake started noticing the helicopters. The first one flew over on a Tuesday morning. It was black and had no markings on it. Jake watched it circle his property 3 times before flying away. He told himself it was probably just the county checking for storm damage, but more helicopters came. Sometimes 2 or 3 in one day. They always flew in circles around his farm, like they were looking for something. Jake also saw strange cars on the road near his property. Black cars with tinted windows that drove slowly and seemed to be watching his farm. Jake became worried. He had heard stories about government people taking unusual animals for testing. He could not let that happen to Spark, Crystal, and Sunny. These creatures trusted him. They had become like family to him. "We need to be more careful," Jake told the creatures one evening. They seemed to understand him better now. When he talked, they would tilt their heads and make soft sounds back, like they were trying to answer. Jake moved the creatures to a hidden room he built in the back corner of his barn. He used old boards and canvas to make walls that could not be seen from outside. He put their food, water, and sleeping area in this secret space. During the day, when helicopters might be watching, the creatures stayed hidden, but Spark, Crystal, and Sunny did not like being trapped inside. They missed playing with the bees and exploring the barn. Jake could tell they were getting restless. Sometimes he heard them making sad sounds, like they were calling for something or someone. One night, Jake was woken up by bright lights outside his window. He looked out and saw 3 black trucks parked on the road near his farm. Men in dark clothes were standing around the trucks, pointing flashlights at his property. Jake quickly got dressed and ran to the barn. He found the creatures awake and agitated. Their scales were glowing brighter than he had ever seen, and they were making urgent sounds to each other. "It's okay," Jake whispered. "Stay quiet, stay hidden." But the creatures did not seem scared. They seemed angry. Spark's scales crackled with electricity. Crystal made the air around it so cold that frost formed on the walls. Sunny's light grew so bright that Jake had to squint. Then something amazing happened. A soft humming sound filled the air, like music from far away. The creatures stopped, glowing so brightly, and tilted their heads, listening. They looked at each other and made excited chirping sounds. Jake did not understand what was happening, but the creatures seemed happy about something. They huddled together, and their scales began to pulse with gentle light in a steady rhythm, like heartbeats. Outside, Jake heard the trucks driving away. The men had left without coming onto his property. Jake wondered if the creatures had somehow scared them off, but he did not know how. The next morning brought more surprises. Jake went outside to check his mail and found his neighbor, Mr. Davis, standing by the fence between their properties. Mr. Davis was holding a basket of the biggest vegetables Jake had ever seen. "Jake, I don't know what you're doing over there, but it's affecting my whole farm," Mr. Davis said. He did not sound angry, just amazed. "My corn is growing in winter. My chickens are laying twice as many eggs. Even my old tractor is running better than it has in years." Jake did not know what to say. How could he explain that he was hiding 3 magical creatures in his barn? "I've been getting calls from the university," Mr. Davis continued. "They want to study what's happening around here. They're saying there's some kind of energy field centered on your property. You know anything about that?" Jake's heart sank. If scientists were getting involved, it would be even harder to keep the creatures safe. That afternoon, Jake sat in the hidden room with Spark, Crystal, and Sunny. The creatures seemed to sense his worry. They gathered around him and made soft, comforting sounds. Crystal gently touched Jake's hand with its snout, and he felt a wave of calm wash over him. "I don't know how much longer I can protect you," Jake said. "People are starting to notice. They're going to want answers." As if responding to his words, the creatures looked up at the ceiling. That strange humming sound filled the air again, louder this time. The creatures' scales began to glow in complex patterns, like they were sending signals. Jake had the strange feeling that the creatures were not just listening to the humming sound. They were talking back to it. But what could they be talking to? And what were they saying? Outside, Jake heard a sound that made his blood run cold. More helicopters were coming, and this time there were a lot of them. He looked out through a crack in the barn wall and saw lights in the sky, more lights than he could count. Something big was about to happen, and Jake had no idea what it would mean for him and the 3 creatures he had come to love. Jake woke up to a sound he had never heard before. It was like thunder, but it did not stop. It kept going and going, getting louder and louder. The windows in his house were shaking, and his coffee cup fell off the table and broke on the floor. He ran outside in his pajamas and looked up at the sky. What he saw made him forget how to breathe. The sky was full of ships. Not airplanes or helicopters, but ships like nothing Jake had ever seen or imagined. Some were small and sleek, like silver bullets flying through the air. Others were huge, bigger than football stadiums, with lights that pulsed like heartbeats. There were ships that looked like crystals, ships that seemed to be made of pure light, and ships with shapes that hurt Jake's eyes to look at. He tried to count them, but gave up quickly. There had to be thousands of them, maybe tens of thousands. They filled the entire sky above his little farm, stretching from one horizon to the other. Jake's legs felt weak. He sat down hard in the snow, staring up at the impossible sight above. His mind could not make sense of what he was seeing. These were not human ships. They could not be from Earth. Then he remembered Spark, Crystal, and Sunny. He ran to the barn as fast as he could, his bare feet slipping in the snow. He had to make sure the creatures were safe. Inside the barn, Jake found the three creatures, standing in the main area, no longer hiding in their secret room. They were looking up at the ceiling, their scales glowing brighter than Jake had ever seen. They were making sounds too, but not the soft chirps and purrs Jake was used to. These were different sounds, more complex, like they were speaking a real language. "What's happening?" Jake asked, even though he knew the creatures could not answer in words he would understand. But then something amazing happened. Crystal turned to look at Jake, and when it made its musical sounds, Jake heard words in his head. Not with his ears, but in his mind. "Do not be afraid, Jake Miller. Help is coming." Jake staggered backward. The creature had just talked to him. Not with sounds, but directly into his thoughts. "You can talk?" Jake whispered. "We have always been able to talk," Sonny's voice said in his mind. "But we were too weak before. You saved us. You made us strong again. What are those ships?" Jake asked, pointing up at the ceiling. "Our family," Spark answered. "They have come for us. But more than that, they have come because of you." Before Jake could ask what that meant, a new sound filled the air. It was like the humming Jake had heard before, but much stronger. The barn began to glow with soft light that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Jake watched in amazement as a section of the barn wall simply disappeared, like it was made of air instead of wood. Through the opening, Jake could see a ship landing in his field. It was beautiful, made of something that looked like white and gold metal that moved like liquid. 3 figures came out of the ship and walked toward the barn. They were tall, much taller than humans, and they moved with grace that reminded Jake of dancers. As they got closer, Jake could see they looked like Spark, Crystal, and Sunny, but much bigger and more magnificent. The first figure had scales that burned with red and gold fire. The second had scales like blue and silver starlight. The third had scales that seemed to hold all the colors of a sunset. They wore no clothes, but their scales formed patterns that looked like the most beautiful art Jake had ever seen. "Jake Miller," the fire scale being said, and its voice filled the barn like music. "I am Commander Zara of the Celestial Order. We have traveled across the galaxy to meet you." Jake tried to speak, but no words came out. He was dreaming. He had to be dreaming. "You are not dreaming," Commander Zara said gently. "What you see is real. These 3 young ones are the children of our most important leaders. They were taken from us by enemies who wished to hurt our people. We searched for them across many worlds, but we could not find them." Jake looked at Spark, Crystal, and Sunny. They had grown even bigger in the last few minutes, now almost as tall as Jake's waist. Their scales were so bright they lit up the entire barn. "They crashed on your world during the Great Storm," Commander Zara continued. They were dying when you found them. Any other being would have left them to die or tried to use them for gain, but you asked for nothing. You gave them warmth, food, and love when they were helpless. I just wanted to help them, Jake said, finally finding his voice. They were hurt. Yes, Commander Zara said, and Jake could hear something like wonder in her voice. You helped them because they needed help, not because you knew who they were, not because you hoped for reward. You risked your own comfort and safety for creatures you did not understand. The other two beings stepped forward. The silver-scaled one spoke next. I am Crystal's parent, High Guardian Thane. My child has told us how you protected them from those who would harm them, how you hid them and kept them safe. The sunset-scaled being spoke last. I am Sunny's parent, Elder Kai. My child is shown. You asked how you shared your food when you had little, how you gave them the warmth of your fire when you were cold. Jake looked around at all the magnificent beings in his simple barn. I don't understand. Why are there so many ships? Commander Zara's scales flickered with what Jake somehow knew was amusement. Word of your kindness is spread across the galaxy, Jake Miller. Every ship you see carries representatives from different worlds, different peoples. They have all come to see the human who saved the heirs of the Celestial Order with no thought of reward. But I'm nobody special, Jake protested. I'm just a beekeeper. I can barely pay my bills. That, Commander Zara said, is exactly why you are so special. Jake sat on an old wooden chair in his barn, surrounded by beings from across the galaxy. He felt like he was in a dream that would not end. Commander Zara and the other dragon-like aliens stood before him, their scales glowing softly in the dim light. Outside, thousands of ships filled the sky above his small farm. We wish to reward you for your kindness, Commander Zara said. Name anything you desire, and it shall be yours. Wealth beyond counting, technology that could make you the most powerful human on Earth, knowledge of the universe itself. Jake looked at Spark, Crystal, and Sunny. They had grown to their full size now, as tall as horses but more graceful. Their scales shimmered with inner light, and their eyes held wisdom that Jake was only beginning to understand. They were magnificent, but they were still the same creatures he had saved from the snow. I don't want to be powerful, Jake said slowly. I don't need wealth or fancy technology. I just want to keep my farm and take care of these three. They're like family to me now. The aliens exchanged looks. High Guardian Thane spoke first. You could have anything in the known universe, and you choose to remain a simple farmer? This farm is all I've ever known, Jake said. My father built it, and his father before him. I like taking care of the bees and growing things. I like the quiet mornings and the way the sun looks when it comes up over the fields. Elder Kai made a sound that might have been laughter. The young ones told us you were different, but we did not fully understand until now. Commander Zara stepped closer to Jake. There is something you must know. Spark, Crystal, and Sunny have bonded with you. In our culture, this is a sacred connection. They have chosen you as their guardian, and they will not leave your side. Jake felt a warm feeling in his chest. They want to stay with me? More than that, Commander Zara said. This bond makes you one of the most important beings in our alliance. You are now the guardian of 3 future leaders of the Celestial Order. Your voice will be heard in councils that decide the fate of entire star systems. Jake's head spun. I don't know anything about leading people or making big decisions. That is exactly why you are perfect for this role, High Guardian. Thane said. You make decisions with your heart, not for power or gain. The young ones will learn wisdom from you that no school could teach. Over the next few days, Jake's life changed in ways he never could have imagined. Ships landed in his fields, and beings from dozens of different worlds came to meet him. Some looked like the dragon creatures, others were completely different. There were beings made of light, beings that looked like walking trees, and beings that seemed to be made of living. Crystal. They all wanted to thank Jake for saving the young dragons. They brought gifts from their worlds, amazing things that Jake did not understand but accepted politely. Most importantly, they brought technology to help him. Jake's old barn was transformed into something that looked like magic. The walls were still wood on the outside, but inside, everything glowed with soft light. The temperature was always perfect, and the air smelled like spring flowers. His bee boxes were upgraded with technology that helped the bees make even better honey. The aliens fixed his house too. They repaired the roof, replaced the broken window, and installed systems that would keep everything working perfectly for hundreds of years. But they did it carefully, making sure it still looked like the simple farmhouse Jake loved. Jake's money problems disappeared overnight. The Celestial Order made sure he would never have to worry about bills again. But Jake asked them not to give him too much wealth. He wanted to keep living simply. Wealth changes people, Jake explained. I like who I am now. The most amazing change was in Jake's relationship with Spark, Crystal, and Sunny. Now that they could speak to him mind to mind, they became true companions. They helped him with the farm work, using their abilities to make everything grow better and stronger. Spark could control electricity, so Jake never had power problems again. Crystal could control temperature and water, keeping the crops perfect in any weather. Sunny could create light and energy, making plants grow faster and healthier than ever before. Jake's farm became famous across the galaxy. Beings from many worlds visited to see the place where the great bond was formed. Jake's simple barn became a meeting place where different species worked together to solve problems and make peace. But Jake still got up every morning to check on his bees. He still wore his old work clothes and got his hands dirty in the garden. He still sat on his porch in the evenings, watching the sunset over his fields. The only difference was that now he was not alone. Spark, Crystal, and Sunny were always with him, sharing in his simple pleasures and learning from his quiet wisdom. Representatives from the galaxy stayed in orbit around Earth, but they were not invaders. They were friends, protectors of the man who had shown them the best of what humanity could be. One evening, as Jake sat on his porch with his three companions, he looked up at the ships twinkling like stars in the sky above. "Do you ever miss your old home?" he asked them. "This is our home now," Crystal said in his mind. "Home is not a place. Home is where your family is." Jake smiled and scratched Sunny behind the ears, just like he had when they were small and hurt. "I guess that makes us family then." "We have always been family," Spark said. "From the moment you chose to help us instead of walking away." Jake looked out over his fields, where his bees buzzed happily among flowers that bloomed even in winter. He thought about how his life had changed, how a simple act of kindness had brought the galaxy to his doorstep. But the most important thing had not changed at all. He was still Jake Miller, beekeeper, taking care of the creatures he loved. And that was exactly how he wanted it to stay.